Don't make me think she's there. Don't tell me she's there. I can't even.
Danielle Marzejka was born in 2000 and lived in St. Clair Shores, Michigan, where she attended Lakeshore High School. Friends and family described her as a very compassionate and unique individual who would never hurt a fly. She was dating 19-year-old Seren Abner Bryan, who was born on November 15, 1998. And just like Danielle, friends and family spoke very highly of him. He and Danielle lived with Danielle's father in the Rudgate Clinton Mobile Home Park in Clinton Township, Michigan. Also in the home were Danielle's two brothers, Robert and Kevin Marzejka. However, Danielle and Robert didn't get along, which made her home life that much more difficult. In 2011, their mother, Jill, died from a drug overdose, which left the three siblings in the care of their father, who struggled with alcoholism. Unfortunately, the home was a ticking time bomb that was about to explode and destroy everyone's lives in the process. On August 23, 2018, Danielle and Seren worked a late shift as bussers at the National Coney Island Diner. Afterward, their coworker, Crescenda Whaley, gave them a ride home. The next morning, Crescenda sent Danielle a text message, but strangely didn't receive a reply, which was out of character for Danielle, who always kept her phone with her and carried her charger everywhere. Crescenda even tried calling, but still nothing. She became even more concerned when she still couldn't reach Danielle the following day, and that night, Danielle and Seren failed to show up for their shift at the diner. That same day, August 25th, Danielle's father contacted the Clinton Township police and reported them missing. He told police that he last saw them on the morning of August 23rd, which is strange since they were dropped off at home that night after work. While friends and family considered possibilities, like the couple simply being out of town, one detail stood out. Danielle and Seren, usually active on Facebook, had gone completely silent, and all of their belongings were still in their bedroom. Among them was a necklace that belonged to Danielle's mother, something she cherished deeply and was unlikely to leave behind. One day after reporting them missing, on Sunday, August 26, 2018, Danielle's brother, Kevin, was out cutting grass when he noticed flies coming from the shed and decided to check it out. Inside, he found several trash bags with the swarm of flies around them. He quickly got his father and showed him the bags. With neither of them wanting to open them, they called 911. Here's the 911 call and body cam footage of officers showing up to the mobile home.
911, where is your
Hello?
emergency?
Hello?
Hello, 911.
Hi, I need someone to come to my house immediately.
Okay, what's going on over there?
Well, my sister's been missing for 4 or 5 days. Her and her boyfriend. And we just found 2 bags in the shed, and there's flies all. I think they're in the shed in a bag, okay? And I'm just scared to open it.
Hi.
Hey.
So what's going on here?
So, my sister, his daughter, has been missing for 5 days now.
Okay.
I did a walk around the house to check if there's any trails or anything suspicious. I've seen a boatload of flies behind the shed. And when I pulled things out, we have these bags
Smells like dust in there.
filled with flies, and they don't look good.
I can't even open it.
What makes you think that she's in there? What makes you think something happened to her?
Don't make me think she's there. Don't tell me she's there.
After speaking with the father and son, officers checked the shed and tragically found Danielle and Seren's bodies. They also discovered a hammer along with bloody pillows, bedding, and a roll of tape. An autopsy determined that Danielle and Seren had been suffocated with duct tape that had been used to bind and gag them. Their killer had also crushed both their skulls. Figuring they were likely murdered on the property, investigators had the home sprayed with luminol and found blood on every wall of Danielle's room. They also found blood-stained items, including clothing and towels, hidden in the back of Robert's room. Clearly, he had some explaining to do, but he was nowhere to be found. 3 days later, he was located over 250 miles away at a library in Cincinnati, Ohio, wearing a long blonde wig, a hat, and sunglasses. He was then arrested and charged with the murders of Danielle and Seren. Come to find out, 5 years before the murders, in February of 2015, Robert was the subject of a petition for forced hospitalization for mental illness. He'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which had worsened after the death of his mother in 2011. However, it's unclear if the court petition ever led to treatment. His defense then tried to use his mental illness in their favor by claiming insanity, but in December of 2018, he was found competent to stand trial. In the end, Robert was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. At his sentencing, the judge asked him twice if he wanted to make a statement, but Robert declined both times. He was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sadly, Robert never showed any remorse, and to this day, the motive behind the murders remains unknown. Alissa Gay Reynolds was born in Newport, Arkansas on June 30, 1969, to Otis and Mary Sue Reynolds. After graduating from McCrory High School in 1987, she earned a degree in marketing from Arkansas State University. In 2017, Alissa unfortunately began dating a convicted felon named Sean Cohn, who had recently been paroled. He even moved into her home on Brack Place in Jonesboro, Arkansas. The felony charge was from 2011, when he sold a houseboat called the Never Enough for $275,000, which is all fine and well, except he never paid off the boat before selling it. The new owners only learned about this when the local bank informed them that the houseboat had an active lien against it. Eventually, the boat was seized and Cohn was arrested. He was found guilty, and in June 2015, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was then released after only serving a little over half the sentence. By 2019, Alissa and Cohn's relationship had soured, and on December 2nd of that year, she posted messages on Facebook indicating they had broken up. After that, friends and family never heard from her again. That same day, security cameras at the Axis manufacturing facility where she worked in Paragould captured her leaving at 5:03 p.m. Meanwhile, a neighbor of hers was having a security system installed and captured some of the movement at Alissa's home that day. Before she returned from work, the cameras captured Cohn leaving after pulling his Chevrolet Tahoe out of the garage. The cameras then captured Alissa arriving home at 5:38 p.m. and pulling her 2016 Range Rover into the now vacant garage. 10 minutes later, Cohn can be seen returning to the home on foot. Over an hour later, at 7 p.m., the cameras captured Alissa's Range Rover leaving the garage. Soon after, Cohn showed up at the Elks Lodge in Jonesboro, but not before stopping at the country liquor store, where he used Alissa's credit card to buy some beer. Over the next few days, friends and family began to suspect that something wasn't right. For starters, on December 3rd and 4th, Cohn called Alissa's work and told them she had the flu and couldn't come in. On December 6th, he was spotted once again driving the Range Rover. That same day, the manager of a local Sprint store said that Cohn came in and purchased a new cell phone using Alissa's credit card. Meanwhile, her friends and family were receiving text messages from Cohn that they found strange. The messages said she had been in a car accident and was being hospitalized. However, there was no record of her being admitted anywhere around Jonesboro. So on December 8, 2019, after finding her dogs running loose, they called the police and requested a welfare check. When officers arrived at the home and approached the door, they were immediately hit with the stench of decomposing human remains. That was all the probable cause they needed to enter the home, and when they did, they sadly found Alissa dead on the sofa chair, covered in layers of bedding. She still had on her work clothes and badge. Blood and other bodily fluids had soaked the towels and a blanket left beneath the chair. An autopsy determined she had been stabbed to death, and due to her defensive wounds, it appears she fought back hard. The wounds also suggested that her killer continued stabbing her even after she was dead. Thankfully, the killer's DNA was left under her fingernails, and subsequent testing linked it right back to Cohn. However, he had fled to Key West using Alissa's credit cards. Before fleeing, he told some friends that he was leaving and showed them a list of countries with no extradition treaties with the United States. He also met with a former girlfriend named Stephanie Fagley and told her he was thinking of moving to either Cuba, the Maldives, or Morocco. She assumed after he said he was going to Key West that he had chosen Cuba. On December 9th, 7 days after Alissa's murder, authorities located Cohn in Key West and arrested him. In his possession were Alissa's credit cards and a printed list of countries without extradition agreements with the United States. On that list, Cuba was written in all capital letters and circled, which means his ex was correct about his ultimate destination. Once back in Jonesboro, Cohn was charged with Alissa's murder. During questioning, he admitted to using Alissa's phone after her death to text and communicate fake messages with her friends and family. He also admitted to being the person who called and lied to Alissa's work about her being out with the flu. As for her Range Rover, Cohn had left it at the Memphis airport, heavily damaged. During his murder trial, he took the stand and told a very crazy story about a group that he claimed was known only to him as the Organization. According to him, it was that group who had killed Alissa because he owed them $200,000 in gambling debts and hadn't paid. He said that he was also spending $2,400 a month on drugs and alcohol, mainly heroin and cocaine. He then tried to say he had gone to the hospital 5 times for injuries caused by members of the Organization, but prosecutors only found proof of one visit, which was for alcohol poisoning. He claimed that on the day of the murder, he returned from running errands and found the back door kicked in and Alissa a bloody mess. He said he didn't call the police because he knew he would be blamed. He basically admitted to everything except the murder itself. In the end, it didn't matter because a jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and theft of property. He then received life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus a total of 32 extra years for the other charges. Grace Anastasia Packer, who went by Gracie, was born Susan Hunsicker on August 14, 2001, in Reading Township, Pennsylvania. Her parents, Rodney and Rose Hunsicker, both struggled with mental illness, causing the first 3 years of Gracie's life to be filled with neglect, and by the age of 3, she was placed in foster care. In 2006, a Berks County judge ended the parental rights of Rodney and Rose because they could not provide a safe home. The following year, when Gracie was 6, she and her younger brother Josh were adopted by Sarah and David Packer of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Sadly, things were much worse with the Packers, and once again, Gracie was suffering through physical and emotional abuse. Her adoptive mother, Sarah, was a former county adoption supervisor, and because of this, evidence of abuse in the home was overlooked. Sarah herself was even quoted as saying, "Grace had become, for the lack of a better word, a non-entity. She didn't exist anymore. I wanted her to go away." In 2011, David pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting Gracie and another foster child who was 15 at the time. Even then, he still wasn't charged with physical abuse. After his conviction, Lehigh County Children and Youth opened their own investigation, but once again, Gracie was left in Sarah's custody. This was even after Sarah had lost her job in 2010 and was banned from adopting any more children. By the summer of 2016, Sarah was dating a man named Jacob Sullivan. They lived together in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, but were in the process of moving to Richland Township. It was also around this time that Gracie strangely disappeared. She was last seen on July 4th, 2016 at a family picnic, and Sarah reported her missing a week later, telling the police that she had run away. However, when investigators began looking into Gracie's disappearance, they realized that Sarah and Jacob's timeline didn't match their phone records, movements, and witness accounts. Then, on October 31st, 2016, 2 hunters in a wooded area in Bear Creek Township near the Francis E. Walter Dam discovered dismembered human remains that were later linked to Gracie. When investigators checked Sarah and Jacob's cell phones, they discovered that they had traveled in a pattern that was consistent with disposing of remains. Plus, they searched the couple's home and discovered blood evidence, cleaning supplies, and signs of attempts to conceal a crime. They also found indicators that a body had been stored inside the home. The case then took an unexpected turn in December 2016 when Catherine Albright, who was in a polyamorous relationship with Jacob and Sarah, found them unconscious in their home after an apparent overdose. They were attempting to take their own lives after realizing that investigators were closing in on them. After being hospitalized, Jacob began making incriminating statements regarding Gracie's death and eventually confessed. He said that he and Sarah planned Gracie's murder together. He went on to tell them that he was a closeted and had been watching violent pornography leading up to the murder. He said the assault on Gracie began as soon as they entered the new home in Richland Township on July 8, 2016. He said he hit her in the head, bound her hands and feet with zip ties, placed a ball gag in her mouth, and then, with Sarah's help, moved her to the attic where Jacob sexually assaulted her. During the ordeal, she was sadly restrained, beaten, and drugged, and then left to die. They were hoping the heat in the attic would kill her, but when she was still alive 12 hours later, Jacob went back up there and strangled her to death. After Gracie was dead, they placed her body in a box filled with cat litter and hid it in the attic. Jacob later dismembered the body, and together he and Sarah scattered the remains in a park area in a remote section of Luzerne County near Bear Creek Township, where hunters would make the horrifying discovery a few days later. After the confession, Sarah and Jacob were arrested and charged with murder, sexual assault, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, kidnapping, unlawful restraint, possessing instruments of crime, endangering the welfare of a child, abuse of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, simple assault, and corresponding conspiracy charges. In the end, Sarah was sentenced to life in prison, plus 52 to 104 years, because she confessed and pleaded guilty, which prevented her from receiving the death penalty. While Jacob also admitted his role in the crime, he received the death penalty plus 44 to 88 years in prison. However, he will likely remain on death row because all executions have been on hold since 1999. Due to this, there are now 142 inmates on Pennsylvania's death row. The Pennsylvania Department of Human Services launched an investigation after Gracie's murder, but its findings have not been made public. Gracie's brother, Josh, who was 14 at the time of the trial, said his sister's death was hard on him, but he's coping with it by continuing to share her story and working to stop child abuse. While Catherine Albright was in a relationship with Sarah and Jacob and frequently in the home, she's never been charged with a crime, and according to investigators, didn't take part in it. Joseph Warren Godcharles III, who went by Joe, was born on July 21, 1964, and grew up in Pinellas County, Florida, where he attended Countryside High School. By the age of 48, Joe was living in a condo at Key Royal Villas in Naples, Florida, and working as a manager at a Walgreens in Immokalee. He was described as a devoted father and was known for his charity work, which he loved to do. He also loved the Florida Keys and took frequent trips to Key West. Unfortunately, in the summer of 2012, his life tragically ended. On August 1st, his son, 20-year-old Ryan, came by his father's condo and found it strange that the door was unlocked. As he proceeded inside, he shockingly found his father's body in the bedroom, dead from multiple stab wounds. Investigators combed the scene and found no signs of forced entry or burglary, ruling out robbery as a motive. What they believe is that he most likely knew his killer, but they couldn't determine a motive. While investigators could not pinpoint an exact time of death, they did determine that Joe entered his gated community at 8:24 p.m. on July 31, 2012, and he was murdered sometime between then and 9:16 a.m. the following morning when his son Ryan showed up. Neighbors were questioned, but they claimed they didn't see or hear anything unusual. They also said the woman he'd been dating, named Julie Krinsky, hadn't been around in about a month. For the next 13 years, Joe's murder would remain unsolved until DNA testing brought investigators right back to Julie Krinsky. On December 12, 2025, 53-year-old Julie, who now lived 5 hours away in Beverly Hills, Florida, was arrested as she was leaving work and charged with 1 count of second-degree murder with a weapon. Joe and Krinsky had been friends for many years before their relationship became romantic. According to her LinkedIn profile, she'd worked at the Florida Cancer Specialist since 2008 and had been a lead nurse trainer since 2020. The only criminal record she had was a DUI arrest in the 90s and some traffic violations. At this time, investigators have not revealed a motive, and Krinsky remains innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. At this time, she is being held at Citrus County Jail, awaiting extradition to Collier County, Florida. Judith Corinne Lord, who went by Judy, was born on May 6, 1953, in Maine, the 11th of 14 children. In 1971, her family relocated to Suncook, New Hampshire, located in the town of Pembroke. Her friends and family said she enjoyed playing the guitar and singing, and was said to have a very angelic voice. In March of 1973, she married Gregory Lord, who was deployed to Germany not long after. In September of that same year, she gave birth to their son. By the time she and Gregory moved back to the United States the following year, their marriage was already in trouble. Friends and neighbors said that while Judy loved her husband, he had become physically abusive. At some point in the spring of 1975, police were called to their apartment after reports of domestic violence. After noticing visible injuries on Judy's body, officers arrested Greg and charged him with assault. He eventually pleaded guilty and moved out of the apartment. However, this didn't calm Judy's fears that he would come back and harm her, especially since he moved in with his grandmother across the street from the apartment complex. When he moved, he took all of the furniture except for a bed and a crib. She was also afraid due to the unwanted attention she was receiving from her neighbor. Unfortunately, on Monday, May 19, 1975, tragedy struck. That afternoon, she was with Greg at the bank, cashing her final paycheck from McCurley's nursing home, a job she had quit after Greg moved out. Around 4 p.m., she picked up her son from her best friend, Rebecca Dunbar. That night, from about 8 to 10:30, she played volleyball behind her building with neighbors, including Linda Gable and Jeff Coda. Afterward, Judy went with Linda and Jeff to Linda's apartment for coffee. Linda and her husband, Ernest Gable, lived next door, close enough that their apartments shared a wall. Before going home for the night, Judy told them she was worried because she had left her back door unlocked. Her neighbors said she was often nervous about burglars and would ask them to help check her apartment before she went inside at night. So Jeff walked over and searched the rooms, but found nothing unusual. After the neighbor was done, she took a few sodas from her refrigerator, locked her apartment, and went back next door. Around 11:30 p.m., she went home for the last time. She came back briefly to borrow shoes, then went back into her apartment, never to be seen alive again. Sometime after midnight, Linda heard Judy's shower running. Less than an hour later, around 12:45 to 12:50 a.m., Ernest was dropped off in front of the building. About 1:30 a.m., multiple neighbors woke up to a woman screaming. One neighbor identified the voice as Judy's and heard her yelling to someone to leave her alone until the screams became suddenly muffled, as if someone had clamped a hand over her mouth. After a short silence, another neighbor, Larry Caraway, whose bedroom shared a wall with Judy's, said that for a long time afterward, he could hear moaning sounds and banging noises from the bed and figured she was having sex with someone. Later that day, at around 12:30 p.m., the apartment manager came by to collect her overdue rent and heard Judy's son crying. He tried knocking, but when no one came to the door, he decided to go inside. That's when he discovered Judy in her bedroom with a blue plastic sauna suit pulled over her face. He pulled the plastic off and realized she was unresponsive and called the police. As for Judy's 1-year-old son, he was found alive in his crib, unharmed. When investigators arrived, they found the bedroom a mess with clear signs of a struggle. A curtain was ripped down, the bed was shoved out of place, a travel alarm clock had stopped at 1:47, and a mirror and lampshade were knocked to the floor. As for Judy, she was found naked, and an unsmoked Marlboro cigarette was lying on top of the bedspread. They also found dried seminal fluid on 2 towels at the foot of the bed. Since the towels were wet, investigators theorized that Judy had used them to dry off after her shower, and the seminal fluid got on them afterward. Sadly, she had been beaten and strangled to death in what appeared to be a sexually motivated attack. Investigators collected loads of evidence, including bedding, towels, the sauna suit, fingernail scrapings, sexual assault samples, and hairs. An FBI lab analyzed hairs found in one of Judy's hands, one from her abdomen and one from the sheet, and determined they belonged to an African American individual. Greg was an obvious early suspect due to the documented domestic violence, as were her neighbors Larry Caraway and Ernest Gable. At first, Greg looked very suspicious because he was quoted as saying, "What do you think? I strangled her and then effed her?" Investigators were immediately confused about how he knew she had been strangled and sexually assaulted, but then it was revealed that he had arrived at the apartment before the police and seen all the injuries to Judy's body firsthand. Larry also became suspicious at first because he initially lied to investigators about an affair he and Judy had. Regardless, both Greg and Larry were able to provide solid alibis and were both ruled out as suspects. That only left Ernest, who was 24 at the time, and someone Judy had expressed fears of due to the unwanted advances he had made towards her. He had even entered her apartment uninvited, saying he wanted to see her naked. Another time, when his wife Linda was away, he went to Judy's door at around 2 a.m. and asked if she wanted to party. At this point, Judy had confided in multiple people, including neighbors and co-workers, that Ernest wasn't leaving her alone and was even lingering around her doors and windows. Then an associate of Ernest came forward and said that he had made comments about the girl next door, living alone, and that someday he was going to get him, and I quote, "a piece of that white meat." There was also a lot of physical evidence that pointed to Ernest, including 5 latent fingerprints that were found on the outside of Judy's front window and matched to him in a way consistent with someone pushing the window open to get in. When confronted, he became nervous and gave conflicting explanations. There were also the claw marks on Judy, which investigators believe came from Ernest due to his longer than average fingernails. It looked more and more like they had their man, until a serious error put the case on hold. In 1975, the FBI lab produced a flawed forensic report claiming that the hairs found at the crime scene could not have come from Ernest. However, over the next few decades, forensic science evolved, and experts realized that microscopic hair comparison was very unreliable and had unfortunately been overstated in thousands of cases nationwide. Thankfully, investigators had preserved much of the evidence, and it was recently sent off for modern DNA testing and linked right back to Ernest Theodore Gable. Unfortunately, he died in Los Angeles in 1987 after being stabbed by another man. As for her husband, Greg, he died in March 2019 after losing the battle with cancer. He was in hospice at the Veterans Hospital in Bedford, Massachusetts, and living with his partner in Wakefield, Massachusetts. He had remarried and had 2 daughters. Had Ernest still been alive, he would definitely have been charged with Judy's murder.